Welcome to Pubtalks, everybody. Make yourselves at home. There, of course, are seats on the front row because that's the way everything happens. We're so glad you're here. I want to first take a minute and introduce me. My name is Suzanne Stelling. I actually work at Cedar Springs. I'm the Director of Women's Ministries. I'm your moderator tonight because our topic tonight combines two of my great loves, faith and science. Because I work here at Cedar Springs, you may make some very reasonable assumptions about what I believe about God. I have a passion for Jesus and an experience of the Holy Spirit. But you may not know that in my past I used to teach introductory biology and do laser research. One of the things that was so interesting to me was the cell. The cell thrilled me. Golgi bodies moved me. Mighty mitochondria energized me. I couldn't sit still as I observed the undulating beauty of sea cucumbers in motion, or the pursuit of a sea lion by a great killer whale, or as I imagined the pathways of electrons as they raced around their atomic speedways. I wanted to classify with Linnaeus. I wanted to measure beaks with Darwin. I wanted to fit microscopes with Janssen and create vaccines with Edward Jenner and chart hybrids with Gregor Mendel. Natural selection just made me naturally curious about survival traits. Punnett squares made me observe dominant and recessive traits everywhere I went in facial features. And by the way, I've already nailed several of the gentlemen in here who have ear hair. It's one of those. Protein formation won my heart. You're truly seeing my nerd side. It won my heart and my mind as I saw those long chains of amino acids folding and cartwheeling their way into glorious proteins for the cell, for the body. I was caught in wonder. Anatomy and physiology was the highest grade I ever made at a university course, because that's when it hit me. Science, for me, is worship. During that time, I began to realize three very important truths. One, if God was not so vast, I would not want to worship him. Two, Jesus came to take away my sin, not my mind. I could be intellectually honest and be a Christian. This was a both-and situation. And three, very few people, I find, are willing to live in the tension that we find ourselves with faith and science, which brings us to our topic tonight. Now, it's interesting. What I would love for you all to do tonight is be open and love well. I think that there's going to be a diversity of opinions in this room, and my hope for tonight is that that diversity will be embraced, that this will not be degenerative, but instead it will build us up. I would like to introduce Rob Zimmer. Where are you, Rob? Hey. All right, come on down. It's your time. He's going to tell you a little bit about his credentialing, his story, leaders, ramifications, DNA science, show some video clips, all of that. And then we are going to have a time with three panelists, and then we're going to open it wide up for question, answer, discussion, dialogue. So thank you, Rob.
All right. Thank you, Suzanne. Appreciate it. Boy, I really hate to follow Suzanne. She's such a great communicator, and the entire introduction now is pretty much, how can I follow that? That was really, really well said, Suzanne. Thanks very much. I too want to thank you for joining us tonight, especially a night like this with all this rain and really bad storm out there. Fortunately, we have Frank White with us tonight because he couldn't fly, right, Frank? Wherever you are. Oh, here he is over here. But thank you again. As far as credentials go, I don't really like to go into credentials and DNA. Maybe we'll get into DNA a little later. But when I look at these three questions and then I look out here, what a diverse crowd we have. And I wonder why that is. And I think that really the overriding question tonight is really about why is it that we have such a division and discord within the faith community, as well as certainly between the faith community and the scientific community. Why is it that we have this division? And I also, it seems to me that the fundamental evangelicals and the science community, I see this gap as, and that's really why we wanted to come in here this evening, I see this gap kind of spreading a little bit, and more as each year passes. And I think back and I just wonder exactly why that's taken place. I think that is detrimental to our witness, actually. And we're going to get into the reasons why these questions, we struggle with these questions. If I went around this room right now, I am guaranteed that we're going to get quite a diversity of answers on answering these. But I can tell you this, I want to make sure that we hold fast to the essentials of our faith while embracing the importance and significance of scientific discovery. That's a simple little sentence and a simple goal, but it's not so simple as we're going to find out this evening here. It's not so simple at all. But we'll get into our backgrounds a little later. But again, this evening is really more about you, hearing from you, and we're going to encourage you to engage with us. Good news, it's not just me. In fact, very little of it will be all about me. It's about 3 expert science panelists that we're going to have up here, and I'll be kind of helping to facilitate. But we really want to hear about you. We want to hear your perspective on things. We're seeing 2 very different worldviews, perspectives, whatever you want to call it. Actually, probably 3 different perspectives in answering these questions. And why is that the case? And we're going to get into all of that as we proceed forward. But could I ask you 3 guys, Art and Robert, and Chris Wilhoit broke his foot about a week ago, so it may be a little bit of time before he gets up here. But while they're taking their seats, I'll tell you a little bit about my background, what I do now. We're identifying genes that are associated with diseases, mostly cancers, of course. And it really is all in the genome, if you will. And RNA is really playing the big role there with that kind of work. So I have really been thrown for a loop myself over the past decade or 2 when we completed the Human Genome Project, and we found that there were 3.2 billion base pairs or so, and found that only a small fraction of that DNA was actually coding for proteins that Suzanne mentioned there. And I thought, wow. And then everybody started calling it junk DNA. But anyway, we'll get into that later. Now we're finding that it's not junk DNA. It's just turning genes on and off, and the complication just goes on and on and on. So anyway, without further ado, I would like to introduce our panelists here. Chris Wilhoit, closest to me, is a businessman in town here. He's the chief financial officer of a high-tech firm. What's really neat about Chris is, first of all, that he's fighting through a broken foot to join us here this evening. But what's really neat about Chris is the fact that I've known Chris for a number of years. He has spent, from his teen years on, studying scientific journals, from Nature to Scientific American and other journals. He looks at his Bible and compares what the Bible says with these very advanced scientific journals. And he weighs the two and works it out. So science is really his forte, in addition to his acumen in the business world. Dr. Art Badoff is here from Oak Ridge National Lab. All 3 of these gentlemen, by the way, are strong believers. They're Christians. All right. Art Badoff is a physicist by training, and he works in material sciences at Oak Ridge National Lab, and specifically the small nanotechnology is his specialty. And the third person on the stage here that we have is Robert Jacobson. Robert will soon to be Dr. Jacobson, as he's completing his work in geology. His dissertation has to do with rock formations on Earth and water flow on Earth as well as on Mars. So interesting perspective here. So we have three folks with a very strong science background, and I wanted to get their perspective on the fact that we have two very different perspectives on these questions before us here, and why is it that we have those? And then basically, guys, and we're going to limit you to about 3 minutes or so, basically, can we start building a bridge between these perspectives? I'm assuming you've done so since you're strong believers as well as working in the sciences, and how have you been able to build this bridge? And Art, suppose we start with you.
If you've read the paper written by Tim Keller on your chairs, I don't need to say anything more, but I still have 2 minutes, 55 seconds, so in my mind, we don't have a crossroads between science and faith. In fact, there's really only one road, and that's the road of truth, which includes both science and faith. Now, they come at it from different directions, different angles. They have different goals, so sometimes they appear to be different, but I think that's more an appearance and not a reality. For me, there is one road, and I like to call it the straight and narrow path. Albert Einstein, some of you know him? Yes. Said, science without religion is lame, but religion without science is blind. And I think that's a really good expression. For me, I really love science. It's great. I enjoy it. I like to find out how things work. I like to find out how we make them work for us. But science by itself is really doesn't have motivation of itself. My faith in God gives me a motivation in science, because then science tells me what the character of God is about, and it gives me incentive to want to help other people with the science that I do. On the other hand, faith is incredibly important for my relationship with God. In fact, that's what relationships are all about, is faith. But when God has a relationship with people, I don't think he asks them to close their eyes to what's around them. And in fact, I think he tells you to open your eyes, look at what's out there. The heavens are declaring his glory. So I see both faith and science as being critical to the way we live. There are times, I guess, when I see potential conflict between them. In my view, it's because the eyes of my heart and the eyes of my mind aren't focused on the same thing. So it's really more that my eyes get crossed and not truth itself. So that's where I'm coming from.
Thanks, Art. And I want to come back around to, that's really the objective this evening is, these crossroads, are they really crossroads? I believe they are, and I'll explain that shortly to you, but if you would, Robert?
Yeah, thanks, Rob. I don't believe that there is a crossroads between faith and science, and I'm very thankful to have this opportunity to share that with you, and I appreciate the words that you shared also. For me, being a student of the sciences right now, I'm greatly learning that science can be trusted because it's continually refined, it's continually reformed. There's many times that we're wrong, but there's a consistent process, and the people that I work with every day, they're dedicating their lives for truth. And I know that the history of the church and the faith that we have to hold has a very similar background of refinement, of reforming, of testing the ideas that we think we have against the whole of Scripture. And so I would just want to leave you with a couple of thoughts. For the scientists, they observe the world, they come up with an idea, and then they test that idea. In Scripture, as a Christian, you observe Scripture, you interpret a meaning, but then you have to test that meaning against the whole of Scripture. You can't just take your idea. You can't just take my idea, or you can't just take any of our ideas and claim that as your own. You have to test it. And many times you're going to find out you're wrong. And I've found out so many times that I'm wrong, which is why I'm actually really nervous sharing this with you, because there's probably aspects of what I'm saying that are wrong, whether it be philosophy or theology. So definitely open for question, open for refining. And I would greatly encourage you, because I see that the benefit in faith and in science have benefited from that process. Thanks.
Chris? Thanks, Robert. Appreciate that.
Well, I am the only non-scientist up here today. My background, I basically grew up in, excuse me, I've got a little clear in my throat, but grew up the son of a teacher in East Tennessee who valued science and philosophy more than faith and religion. So I didn't grow up in church. I grew up with a steady diet of science magazines and philosophy magazines, really from the time I was 7 or 8 years old. And really enjoyed it. When I was 17, I think was when I first read Einstein's book on relativity. And so I really was enamored with, brilliant minds and people like Einstein who could revolutionize the way we looked at the world. Later, in my early 20s, when I was 23, I became a Christian. And when I was 30 is when I was really introduced to the controversy, the apparent controversy between science and faith. And did a lot of debating on forums, did a lot of research, spoke to a lot of people, read a lot of things. And I think a major event for me was in 2004 when some of you may have heard of a fellow by the name of Dr. Anthony Flew. How many here have heard of Dr. Anthony Flew? So, very prominent atheist who had made it his life's work to basically contend that there was no scientific evidence for the existence of God, and at age 81 made it public that the science behind the origin of the universe and the science, unfolding science of the complexity at the cell level had swayed his decision and had swayed his opinion to that of a creator of some sort, not necessarily a faith in a particular religion. I think at that point was kind of a turning point for me, and just being a layperson who reads about science and not necessarily a scientist, it was interesting to see that kind of conversion with somebody who had made it their life's work to dispel that idea. So doesn't prove anything, but it was significant to me. And I think since then it's the science part has actually been something that's carried me through tough times. I've had a time when I lost a CFO position of a company, and it took a hard tumble. And strangely enough, it was my knowledge of the origin of the universe and origin of life that helped maintain my faith in Christianity. So that's pretty much my story. Thanks.
Thanks, Chris. Appreciate it, guys. And again, our objective is to engage, and the reason we limited them to just a few minutes is kind of an intro, is so you can hear from their perspective. I think I'll be kind of the bad guy tonight, and I will pull the pin and throw the grenade out there. And I see where you're coming from, and I fully agree, working in the sciences for 30, 40 years myself, and being a believer, I don't see a big collision course. But here's my point. My point is, when I look at those three questions, and I've traveled around the country, and I'm not going to mention names, but I can tell you that there are private Christian colleges that require their professional staff, their professors, to sign a waiver, for example, or agreeing that we are agreeing to a young earth, if you will, or 7 literal 24-hour periods for creation. That is what I'm talking about when I talk about this kind of convergence as crossroads. Myself, I'm like you guys. I don't have a problem with it. But I can tell you that when we engage this audience out here, I think we're going to see some discord. We see it within the faith, and then we see it, of course, between a worldview of a believer and a worldview of someone who doesn't believe at all, and says, no, I have no problem with those. We just happen to be here by chance. We would say, no, we're not here by chance. We're not even in this room tonight by chance. We're here for a purpose. I would like to see our body of believers focus more on the purpose that we're here rather than arguing points about whether we're young earth or old earth and that sort of thing. I think we're wasting our time and causing a greater division and resulting in our inability to witness better to the community. And that's really what I'm getting at. Here's the grenade I'm going to throw out there, and it has to do with the Bible. I think that the interpretation and use of the Bible is a contributing factor to this discord. And let me explain what I mean. First of all, by show of hands, how many of you believe that the Bible is the Word of God? Right? Pretty much universal. How many of you believe that the Bible is the inerrant Word? You guys, all three of you? Yep, myself. So we're all in agreement there. And we're talking about an omnipotent God. We're talking about a God that's all-knowing. Absolute truth was mentioned tonight by Art. I fully agree. This is the pure form of absolute truth. If that's all the case, why would we have disagreement and discord on these questions? My answer is, and I'm going to welcome disagreement because I'm sure I'm going to get it from a few folks that I know in the room here, is that the Bible is not a science textbook. The Bible was written, as John Walton would say, it was written for us and was not written to us. It's our template to live our life. It tells of a history of mankind. It tells about redemption and salvation. It tells about creation. And that's an essential, in my faith, I believe, is we were created for a purpose. And somebody said, oh, we're here by accident, just happened to be here. That's where we have a disconnect. If somebody said, here's how we got into this form, theistic evolution or evolution period versus intelligent design, that to me is the non-essential on how he did it. He doesn't explain in Genesis, in my opinion, how he did it. It's a template. It was written for us to tell us that he is in control and that he created us. And that's the whole key in my mind as we move forward into the evening. And I want to make sure that we tackle these issues head on. I'm not going to stand here and say, are you a young earth or an old earth, or are you an evolutionist or something else, or a non-evolutionist or whatever. We've all been down that road. We've carried that baggage for a long, long time now, actually. And I really do think it's causing this great gap or chasm to continue to expand. Suzanne mentioned DNA. I mean, when you look at the workings of the cell and cell division, and then you look at RNA and messenger RNA and transfer RNA, I mean, the complication is amazing. We're not going to get into that science tonight. It's not important. And to me, I'm not going to ask you whether you believe in the Big Bang theory or not. I happen to think that the Big Bang is the greatest evidence for a creator that science has ever given us as a gift. To me, there are folks who, Stephen Hawking, we can measure it back to the beginning of time, 10 to the minus 32 seconds. I mean, you know how many zeros to the left of the one that I just told you, I guess. And even 10 to the minus 45 now. But you know what? We can't see behind that curtain because all of this came out of nothing, defies all physical laws that we have. And there's only one explanation for that, and that is something operating outside the bounds of our physical laws, a creator. strongest evidence I have ever seen and ever read about, that alone. From that point forward, and I've met with folks who have completely lost their faith. I've met with, and you guys have as well in the science community, who are atheists, agnostic. But going back to the atheists, and Richard Dawkins, being one who has passed away, but clearly I start with them and I say, where did we come from? Where did that consciousness, the reason that we're all here tonight, we're interested in this topic, where did that come from? Why are we even talking about this kind of thing? So that's really what I wanted to do to kind of trigger this whole discussion. I really can't thank you guys enough for joining us here. I'd like you to stay up here, if you will, and help with the open discussion. And Stephen, could we see, I just wanted to show you a 4-minute clip. Talk about evidence for, Frank, I don't want to use the term intelligent design. I don't want to use the term evolution. I'm kind of in between. I don't think evolution is a bad word. I don't think creation is a bad word from the scientific community. I mean, in all fairness, okay? But I don't have a problem with evolution to a point until that touch of consciousness came into play. Beyond that, I think evolution. But I'd like you to see a little 4-minute clip, Stephen, if we have it here. And I'm going to get out of your way.
With computer animation, we can enter the cell to view this remarkable system at work. After entering the heart of the cell, we see the tightly wound strands of DNA, storehouses for the instructions necessary to build every protein in an organism. In a process known as transcription, a molecular machine first unwinds a section of the DNA helix to expose the genetic instructions needed to assemble a specific protein molecule. Another machine then copies these instructions to form a molecule known as messenger RNA. When transcription is complete, the slender RNA strand carries the genetic information through the nuclear pore complex, the gatekeeper for traffic in and out of the cell nucleus. The messenger RNA strand is directed to a 2-part molecular factory called a ribosome. After attaching itself securely, the process of translation begins. Inside the ribosome, a molecular assembly line builds a specifically sequenced chain of amino acids. These amino acids are transported from other parts of the cell and then linked into chains often hundreds of units long. Their sequential arrangement determines the type of protein manufactured. When the chain is finished, it is moved from the ribosome to a barrel-shaped machine that helps fold it into the precise shape critical to its function. After the chain is folded into a protein, it is then released and shepherded by another molecular machine to the exact location where it is needed.
This is absolutely mind-boggling to perceive at this scale of size such a finely tuned apparatus, a device that bears the marks of intelligent design and manufacture. And we have the details of an immensely complex molecular realm of genetic information processing And it's exactly this new realm of molecular genetics where we see the most compelling evidence of design on the Earth.
Thanks, Stephen. Appreciate it.
You all
Yes.
can see why I love protein synthesis, especially with that music in the background. It's like, it's done, yes.
And Chris, we're going to want you to take the mic and walk up and down and pass it to people here. If you mind. No, thanks for your attention. This is not Bio 101 tonight or anything, but I look at that and I'm like, man, it just blows my mind. I know it's computer animation, but it's true. That's the way, very basically, how things are working. And I asked the question, chance? No, I don't think it's chance. And I'm not standing here on a podium promoting one line of thinking to another. It's just that you're not going to see that in Genesis, how that cell division takes place in DNA and RNA. Of course we wouldn't. But we hold strong to the Holy Bible. And by the way, we have a resource sheet that's back there for everybody to take home with them. I also want to thank Dr. Frank White, who has been so nice to put a whole list of resources on a back table back there, from books to DVDs on this subject. The Mystery of Life, that's what that film came out of. That too is on the resource sheet from you. But anyway, so let's start opening this up here right now. And I want to explain one other concern I have. And this happened to me. It's my own story. But I'm concerned about our high schoolers and even the 20-somethings, but basically looking at high schoolers who leave here. They're strong believers out of high school. They go on to college, and the percentage of them that are losing their faith and falling off the cliff, if you will, is very alarming. Personally, I think they should hold strong to the essentials of their faith and go to the scientists and say, Dr. Science Professor, tell me more. Tell me how he did it. Science is a gift from God. How did he create us? People are going to say, well, there's no such thing as creation. No, I believe it is. That's core to my faith. But help us understand how he did it. DNA and RNA and mitochondria and et cetera, et cetera. Help us with that. And I think this gap that we have and the bridge that we build will come together, and they're starting to talk about how he did it. You mean you're willing to listen to me? I look at Julian Reese, who's here in the audience, and his ministry. Julian goes down on that campus of UT and sits with these PhD professors and listens to them, has coffee with them, has lunch with them. Tell me more, Dr. So-and-so. Tell me more. They love it. They open up to him. And so what he's doing is he's building the bridge between two very different perspectives. So let me ask you, I want some of you to comment on, and Moldy's going to pass a mic around here, on this subject that we have, and we're just going to open it up to the floor. We're here as a resource, what we can answer, but does anybody have a comment on what you've heard yet? And thank you again, Frank, for being so kind to bring those resources in.
Yeah, I might consider a different approach than what you say to approach the professor and talk. It's interesting, the person who was interviewed at the end of that clip was Dean Kenyon. And he originally wrote one of the more famous books on how accident can explain the origin of life. And then he started seeing the reality, and if you get into the mathematics, the quantitative side of it, he saw that that just wasn't going to work. And when he started talking about that into his classrooms, he got in trouble.
He got in trouble from which side now?
From the faculty. He got in trouble from the faculty. He was told
chemical evolution.
Yeah, he was told not to talk about his new ideas.
Okay.
So I think some people feel like if you're going in science as a student, you might want to be real careful about unnecessarily talking about your faith, because there was one professor who said, I understand that he knows the science, but he says he doesn't believe it, so I can't pass him. So, I think I think Christians have a bad attitude. I remember hearing about one Christian who threatened a professor because the tree rings proved, according to the professor's talk, that the earth was more than 6,000 years old, so he was actually physically threatened. So, I think the conflict is there, and we don't want to be part of it. So I don't know, should you, on every opportunity, I think you have to pray about when you be wise as a fox before you share necessarily to an unbeliever in the academic setting when they've got power over you. Is it going to further something good or not?
Thanks, Frank. I was at a conference once, and there was and usually at my conferences, we don't have a lot of physics folks showing up, but there was this particle physicist sitting there having coffee, and I sat down next to him, and I said, geez, tell me more about your research. Tell me about the Higgs boson particle, because I had just read about this God particle, a unifying force in the universe. Tell me more. And he started, and I knew where I was going. I wanted to engage him. That's what we're encouraging you, all of us, to do, to engage these folks. And he went on and on. He just opened up. Was he over my head? He was way over my head, but that's okay. That's not my field. But the fact of the matter is, I knew he would come to a dead end. And when I kept asking how, from where, why, and he would come to a dead end. And it wasn't like I was tricking him or anything, but I experienced that myself in my defending my PhD dissertation up at Rutgers years ago. My 5 committee members in a room, and they closed the door, and we were talking about toxicity in a cell, and one of them said, well, so how does the cell sequester these metals, these toxic metals? I said, well, it's a metallothionein is the protein, and blah, blah, blah. And the guy said, wow, okay, well, that's great, but where did that come from? And I didn't have an answer, and so, the sweat starts. You guys know. The sweat starts, and you feel pores opening. And I said, well, it captures the toxic metals and sequesters them, and therefore you don't have an acute toxic effect. He said, oh, it's interesting, Mr. Zimmer, but how? Where did it come from? That's what I'm asking you. I know what it does. I said, well, where did it come from? Well, it's metallothionein, and it's this protein that does. And you see, his point was, finally he got me in the corner. I figured, this is over, it's blown. And I said, Dr. So-and-so, I don't know. He said, exactly. That's where I was heading you. I wanted you to acknowledge that we don't know really. We don't have all the answers in science, and we never will, but we want to search them out, and you will come to a dead end. And that was his point that he was making, and it stuck with me for life. And I'm not saying that we're here to trick folks, but we just, in the sciences, we don't have all the answer. There is the supernatural, and there is the natural. But thanks, Frank, for that comment. Anybody else can comment on what about my comment about the Bible and the use of the Bible and its implications for us? Anybody there? I mean, we're among friends here, please. We're not.
I would encourage you all to let your guards down. We're not going to solve this tonight, that you can love and disagree.
We're not going to solve that tonight?
Shoot. Yeah.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
You're good. No. So my name's Courtney Chandler. I just moved to the area recently, and my background is in psychotherapy. One of the most profound things that has happened to me over the stage of development has been within the ministry of Young Life. And Young Life's real catchline for their leaders and staff is earning the right to be heard by the people around you. And so I think, when it comes to debates like this, it comes to, whether we're on a 2-track train as far as faith and science or an intersect between faith and science. I think the heart of it when we debate, the heart of it when we discuss, the heart of it when we attempt to reach the lost, on whatever side of the coin that lands, really boils right back down to this, truth that without earning the right to be heard by people, our message falls on deaf ears. And so regardless of the side of the coin that we fall on, and as my niece sitting here in high school, I think regardless of what comes at us, right, we ultimately are not the judge. We can have an opinion, we can study and research and defend our facts, our lens, the way that we see it, but at the end of the day, right, Alyssa, we have to come to this place where we can come to peace with what is truth and the fact that we don't know this side of heaven, and within that our job is to earn the right to be heard by the people around us, that we don't have to beat them over the head with what we know in theory, right, but to love people, that earns the kingdom, and it earns a voice for us to be able to love, right? Yeah.
Courtney, thanks very much, because it's so well said, and that's why we're trying to emphasize the listening in order to build this bridge, to sit down and earn the respect, if you will, and it's credibility, and it goes both ways. But listening, tell me more about I'm really fascinated by the work that you do. Tell me more, and not say, hey, I've got the answers. I'm telling you, we got here about 20,000, 10,000 years ago or so. There's a museum up there right on the Kentucky border. I want you to go to that museum. It's a Young Earth Museum, and because that's going to prove it to you, and because I'm going to give you the answers. But instead, Courtney, you're talking about building that bridge and reaching out and being open to it. You're holding strong to your core faith, your essentials, and listening to others on the other. And thank you so much. Very well said.
Art, do you have something to say?
Well, I just wanted to ask you guys a question. I'm going to assume most of you aren't scientists. So if you go to a dinner party, are you comfortable talking to scientists, and what would you talk about?
Great question.
That's maybe why I don't get invited so often.
And look at the response, Art. I mean, no, that's a really good question. So basically what you're asking is, whether it's a person of science or anybody else, how do you engage them? And again, coming back to what Courtney's talking about, and really to listen to them and get into this and hear their perspective. So, Julian.
Robert, you're still in school, kind of in the last throes of the dissertation process. So I wanted to know what have been some of the more challenging things to your faith as you've been in this scientific education process? And I also want to know, and it's a separate question, what are the different kinds of attitudes that you found from your unbelieving professors, or ones you think are unbelieving?
Yeah, I'll try to take that one at a time, because I think those are one's more of my experience, and the other one's more of emotions and feelings. Let's see. The first one was, what in my science has challenged my faith? Not a whole lot, honestly. A lot of my science has actually encouraged my faith. I think Chris agreed with that in his comment. You just see God's love for his creation all over Scripture. There's a psalm that it says, our God is a great God. In his hands are the depths of the earth. The heights of mountains are also his. The sea is his, for he made it, and his hands formed the dry land. So everything I work on, he went before me. And I've seen that visibly. I work on this little, it's not little, it's like about the size of Knoxville, place on Mars. And the only other people that work on this happen to be Christians. Wow. No idea how to explain that, but God. So it's been encouraging. I would say that the theological questions have challenged my faith a lot more, and I think for good reason. I think, Rob, one of an implication of maybe what you were saying was, if it wasn't factual, is it okay that the Genesis account wasn't factual?
Was not factual?
Right.
No, I think it's factual. This is what I want to, and I'm glad you brought it up.
Clarify, yeah.
Yeah, I know. I think the word is inerrant, but go ahead.
I think that's where we get a rift in where we might feel we're going to side. Mm-hmm. Can God reveal something that's truth, but not necessarily factual? Is he allowed to do that? Does our theology allow for that? I I right now I've been encouraged by Paul in Philippians. He's in his cell. I don't know if I'm ever going to get out of this PhD program, to be absolutely honest. And Paul firmly believed that he was going to go to Spain. He believed it with all of his heart, and he didn't make it. And I think that that's okay. And so I'm curious too. I think that that's where there's a root there that causes friction when can we not trust Genesis? And I think it drives us deeper to ask deeper questions of our faith, deeper questions of God. So I like that question.
And good point. And to follow up on it, and I don't mean to mislead anybody here, I too believe in the inerrant word, the inerrant message. And I believe we've never had an archaeological dig that I know of that has proven the Bible to be wrong, from an archaeological viewpoint. My whole point here is that it was the overriding message in Genesis for me is you're here because I created you out of nothing, the entire universe I did. I want to bring up an interesting point. On your sheet, Gerald Schroeder, there's a book called The Science of God on that sheet. And this may be amazing to you. It was amazing to me. 4th of July, we see the fireworks going off, and when they explode, the high energy right away, rapid, and then they dissipate a little bit as the energy dissipates. Gerald Schroeder, as a physicist, basically, they're on the back table. You can pick some of those up. But basically looked at this whole issue of Genesis, 24-hour period, 7 days. All right, now, basically what he looked at, he said that the speed of time at the Big Bang, just like fireworks, was millions of times faster than it is now. And basically, he worked an algorithm out. It's in that book. And his algorithm shows that we're looking at about 6.86 or so days looking at that time. Are you with me? I know I'm kind of over my head, actually. So I really don't know what I'm talking about. But I just want to pass on what he said. Now, I want to warn you because John Walton would say, oh, no, what we're doing is we're bending our scriptural readings to fit our scientific models. Gerald Schroeder would say, no, I did an algorithm, and I'm telling you that the universe is 15 billion years old, and it's also was created in 6.86 days or something like this. So somebody says, are you a young Earth or old Earth? And I'll say, well, I'm both, actually. So that's Julian, did we?
No, we
thank you
need to get to question number 2 for sure.
Yeah. What was the first one?
What was the question, Julian? What's the perception from
I'm assuming that they're all kind of different perspectives in your science program that you've had as far as attitudes toward faith. I mean, everybody who's not a person of faith, they're all not the same. So what are some of the attitudes toward faith and your faith, maybe, that you've noticed and observed as you've gone through your career?
I'm going to think about that. And Art, do you have a response? Because you work with a lot of people with different backgrounds.
I get to work with people from around the world. So I've worked with Hindus and Muslims, and in a sense they're people of faith, but their faith feels a lot different from mine. Most of the people I work with are agnostic. Several are atheistic. And so you get different feels. Some don't find it interesting. Some would love to put me in a corner and, trap me on something. Others would like to just sort of make fun of religion in general. I don't know if that answers your question, but it gives you an idea of the diversity of people that are in Knoxville.
And Julian, if I may, and Chris, and you can answer this as well. I can tell you from my own experience, this is as an undergrad, grew up in Pennsylvania, grew up as a Lutheran in a Christian family. When I went as an undergrad to study biology, and the professor, whose name was on the side of the book, by the way, and I figured he's got a PhD and his name's on the book, he must know everything. was teaching us about evolution, I completely fell off my belief in a God. And I did because I wasn't well grounded to accept that theory and still hold strong to a creator. So I fell off. I came back later when I looked at complexities of living things in the cell to embrace it and say, man, this is incredible, the complexity of all this. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
No, someone's got a question. Definitely.
You're just evading the answer, right?
I mean, I'll provide an answer. Is it on the same topic, or I can be really quick?
Go ahead. Go right
Okay, yeah.
ahead.
I would just say, from my perspective, those that aren't in the faith, they don't respect or at least acknowledge faith because it's not testable in the empirical way of taking observation, taking data. Then it wouldn't be faith. And I think me and Chris talked in the hallway about, we had our debate about really kind of what that video shows is that they're showing you an incredibly complex system. And the claim is that it's so complex that the only explanation is God. And that is one explanation, but it's not a testable explanation. And science is rooted in the ability to test something. And I would say that for those, I would want to invite people maybe into the faith perspective. It is a testing. God invites us to offer him our faith. And so test your faith by offering it to God and seeing what he does. Test your science and your explanations for this real world by looking for answers that he's placed. Don't just say that, oh, the situation's too complicated, end of story. Yeah.
Good point. Thanks.
Caveat, I'm married to the guy in the middle, so we have discussed this kind of stuff before. But I remember one time I asked you the question, would it be fair to say that experiments done in physics over the last 100 years have really changed our definition and our understanding of what time is? I remember one time you described an experiment to me that seemed to suggest you could have an effect before you had the cause. Schroeder's cat comes to mind. But I was wondering if you could just address some of that bit about time and how that's changed.
Thank you, Art.
That's your wife, Art, so you can.
I'm probably the least qualified to talk about this, so Art can correct me. But I think there's some experiments going on at the new powered-up CERN facility, I guess, to look for retrocausality in high-energy interactions. Is that correct?
I don't know the answer.
Okay. Well, that's what I've read anyway. Okay. And so that's, part of my experience was, I read, maybe 400 science journals by the time I was 18. So I followed science more like a sports enthusiast, if you will. So a lot of, I guess you would say I'm probably an inch deep and a mile wide, but this issue of retrocausality, I mean, we really don't know what time is. And I know, I've been asked, how old do I think the Earth is? And my, if I gave a retort to that would be, what's your definition of time? Can we have an agreed upon definition of time? And of course, the discussion stops there. But, I mean, because we really don't know what time is. Now, do I have a particular problem? Do I have to see, do I have to have a young earth interpretation of the Bible? No. I can tell you, like I say, I became a Christian. I didn't know there was a conflict between science and faith. I became a Christian at 23, wasn't raised in a Christian home. I was raised in a home that valued knowledge of science, philosophy, larger, issues. Never barely darkened the door of a church. And I was 30 before I found out there was a controversy. I felt completely comfortable believing in evolution and Big Bang, and I love, the Big Bang Theory. It's one of the biggest confirmations of faith, like Rob said. So I don't know if I answered your question or not, but I guess the issue, when you think about, I guess probably what I would like to say is growing up reading science journals, I was very awestruck with this issue of infinitum to infinitum. We build Hubble builds we build a big telescope. Hubble looks out and sees these stars with gas extinction, we find out they're galaxies. You know, we build bigger super colliders, we find smaller and smaller fundamental elements of our reality, and we assign things like, you know, that it's a particle. Well, is it a particle, or is it that just convenient for us to assign those types of descriptions to make them more understandable to us? So that is, and so as science unfolds, it unfolds majesty from my perspective.
Thanks, Chris. Appreciate it.
Got Matt?
Sorry, if y'all were going to continue on that, I'll hold the question.
I want to hear questions.
Yeah, we're looking for more questions, actually.
Okay. So, being somebody without a science background, you guys could, you know, make up words and add zeros, and I would have no idea what you're talking about. So, I would love to get the four of y'all to sort of interact with each other, and just, if that's okay with you, to hear, you know, do the four of you have this same view on sort of the theistic evolution, intelligent design, that whole thing about origins, and just hear the four of y'all sort of talk amongst yourselves and where you agree and disagree and how you understand that stuff.
Wow. Next question. No, I think it's a good suggestion. We will, but we can do that along with you all. We want. But was there another question right now? Yes, sir. Go ahead, and then we will get back to that, Matt.
It's just simply that it's not only the believer that might need to have faith, but also I wonder if scientists realize that there is uncertainty, you know, in their faith. They have to have faith, actually, don't they? To be an atheist, for example, one of my friends, when I first met him, his last name was, it was associated with a Christian name from South America. I asked him that, I mentioned to him that I thought he must be a Christian. He said, no, I'm an atheist. Well, he's become one of my best friends, but the thing is that he realizes that that takes faith to say that you're an atheist, just as it takes faith to say that you're a Christian. It just so happens that it takes an awful lot more faith to take a perspective that we're here by accident. And so that's the thing I'm noting among our scientists, friends, to the extent that your colleagues realize that there is uncertainty in what they claim sometimes as solid science, just as there is uncertainty. We have a certain amount of uncertainty in our faith, don't we? And that's what faith is all about. The faith we require as believers is relatively small compared to the amount of faith it would take to be an atheist.
Thank you. I appreciate that perspective, and you're absolutely right that there are certain leaps that we all make. That's why when we threw these three questions up here and the different worldviews and perspectives on how to answer them, that's why I think, as Courtney had pointed out, you know, just that credibility and listening to others and accepting it, but trying to get back to defining the essentials of our faith, where we would, quote, draw the line in the sand. And Suzanne and I talked the physical resurrection of Jesus Christ, the deity of Jesus Christ. Can we prove the deity of Jesus Christ? Well, I think there's a lot of evidence overwhelming. That's at the core of my faith, not a spiritual resurrection, physical. And if you would ask me and say, well, are you making a leap there on that? I wouldn't consider it a big leap, but I would defend it and say, yeah, that's at the core of my faith. That's an essential to my faith. If it was spiritual and he wasn't resurrected, I think we're all wasting our time coming to church here, to be honest with you.
In the Friends video that was shown at the start, at one point Phoebe says, evolution is one possible explanation, and Ross, responds right away, it's the only possible explanation. And I think that line of thinking is precisely the problem with evolution. If for you there can be no creator God, then there is no other explanation for life as we know it. I mean, I think if there were a viable alternative, evolution would have been abandoned a long, long time ago. And if you think about the other forms of science, the way you do it is you formulate a theory, you run some tests to see if your theory holds up, and if it doesn't, then you just have to concede that it's wrong. But you can't do that with evolution because there is no alternative. And so every bit of data that you come across has to be interpreted in such a way as to uphold evolution. So that's kind of what Lyndon was talking about, you know, having to have faith in your unbelief in that case.
I wish that Darwin was alive now, because I think of when he wrote his book and the tsunami wave of evolution came on the scene. There was so little known about the inner workings of the cell. And I would love to see what he would say now in our day and time about the cell. And what would he say about the things that he said would happen in continuance and they have not? Because he was a wonderful naturalist. He had a great theory, a great mind. And I do wish sometimes that I could have a good conversation with him.
Art, go ahead.
I really wanted to comment. I think most of my scientific friends would be willing to consider possibilities, for example, in evolution or anything they believe. They understand that they can be wrong. But they might ask you, you think God created it. Is there any doubt about that? Do you have is there any possibility that that's not true? And they don't see us as being equally fair to testing that question. Just something to think about. So do scientists. I want us to be open-minded too.
Yeah.
And Art, before Chris responds, I fully agree with you, and I too have had those discussions. And I go back to, again, evidence for God. Well, it's just faith. And I say, no, there's strong evidence, because we can't look behind that curtain 10 to the minus 45 seconds ago, and all of this came out. And then they say, well, it's the wave theory. And then I say, well, explain the wave theory to me, because it's over my head. That this has always existed. How could something have always existed and no force behind it? So it's interesting, and I agree with you, Art. I think you've made a good point, and your point's well taken, that there is faith on both sides, right? Pretty much. Chris, I interrupted you. Go ahead.
Well, that's okay. I think in some of the positions I've held, running companies with. Helping run companies with very brilliant people. The company I'm at now, we have loads of scientific and engineering types. And, something funny that happened to me, a good friend of mine who I worked with is a theistic evolutionist, okay? And, we get along quite well. I don't really accept a lot of the tenets of evolution, but the reason we get along well, one day we were, I was speaking with this individual, and I said, if God used evolution to create this complex biosphere we live in today, that'd be vastly more miraculous than fiat creation. I mean, if you deployed a technology 3.5 billion years ago, that's able to grow in complexity and diversity over that time span. Anybody that studies, robotics and trying to build systems that can grow in complex, I mean, we struggle to get something that'll just function as designed originally. Okay, so I think it's actually easier for us to do, right? As in the applied sciences area, is to create something that will just function for a certain period of time without our intervention to keep it from functioning. So So that's the, I never really saw a conflict with evolution. Maybe it was that, I don't know. But, that's not completely fair. I did see some conflicts and have engaged in those. But at the end of the day, that's kind of one way you can look at it. It was to deploy that type of technology that long ago and end up with what we have today, that'd be pretty fantastic. So it definitely wouldn't take God off the table.
I wanted to come back to Art's hypothetical dinner conversation with a group of scientists. I'm a biologist, a wildlife biologist, so there are some scientists in the room, at least one. And I think that sometimes in that sort of casual conversational time, when it's a good time to talk about things that matter, Christians have a certain language that they speak from, and it's biblical, and it's something that we use in church a lot. I'm also a Christian, as well as a biologist. It's something that we use in church a lot, but when you're talking to somebody who's outside the church, that's not an effective means of communicating your position a lot of the time, has been my experience. But I was wondering what you all think about that, and if you've come across that as well.
Great point. Great point.
Thanks very much, Lydia. I think the word underneath it all is jargon. I mean, I can tell you that I'm a fluvial geomorphologist, but whoa.
Will you say that again?
But I can also tell you that I'm a Reformed Presbyterian, and that we have all these, it's Christianese, it's science jargon, and when we're speaking like that, we're forgetting the other person. We're forgetting that it's really about engaging them. So I appreciate your comment.
Mm-hmm. And may I say, and thank you very, very much for bringing this up. I just finished a book. It's on your resource sheet called Speaking of Jesus by Carl Medeiros. And he talks about a circle. And we as Christians put ourselves in this circle. And if you don't talk like us, walk like us, dance like us, laugh like us, and accept what we accept, you're outside the circle there. But we have a very strong circle line around us, and we're very comfortable in this when we go to our Sunday school classes and sit in our worship services. Very comfortable. Your point's very well taken, and Carl Medeiros in his book's pointing out that it's time to break that little circle and reach out there, and this jargon that Robert's talking about, and converse with them and engage them in their language. And if we don't understand something, we say, geez, help me out with that. Tell me more about this wave theory. Tell me more about this Higgs-boson God particle. And they'll say it's not a God particle. Okay. And I know, Julian, you've experienced this in your discussions, but thanks for bringing that up. I really appreciate it. Let's get, yes, sorry.
Just wanted to tag on one of the things that I think has come out as you, as a panel, discuss this, and that is I work with students, having been in the academy and working with students now, but through ministry. One of the things I would just sort of observe is that it may not be so much a matter of grounding in their faith, but I think there's an element of ego strength.
I'm sorry, what? Ego?
Ego strength.
Okay, gotcha.
Identity.
Yeah.
That comes into it.
Scholarship.
Well, and also Julian and I are good friends, and talking about students who will stand up and walk out of classes at the university when they don't agree with the content. And it's as if going into that place where a strong argument is made for something is going to undo their faith. And they're fearful. And this is also part of what I see in students is a not wanting to be seen as the odd person out. But I've seen it in peers my own age, where it's when somebody has an intellectual argument that makes sense but threatens their perspective, suddenly they become defensive and the chasm grows because they are there, and it's no longer about the point of discussion. It's about who are they, what do they believe.
Let's unwrap that a little bit. Are you saying that if they don't agree that they should get up and walk out, or should they try to engage and explore that further, or what? What are you suggesting?
Well, I think there's an element of fragility where if they cannot handle the intellectual argument that's coming from the other side, they don't go back and they're not willing to do what you did in your dissertation. I don't know, but I can go and read, and let's get back together and have a conversation about it. You know, but rather than do that, it's too threatening. And so you withdraw to being dogmatic about it rather than, okay, let's have a discourse.
Yeah. Very, very good point. Very well said.
I think it's on your point, earning the right to be heard.
Yeah.
He's hitting on it. It's a fear-based intolerance.
Yeah.
We don't know how to defend it. We don't know how to approach it. Your circle, it alludes to this. We have stopped societally, I really believe, at celebrating progression towards the cross because they haven't fallen within the line, right?
Right.
So to blow that line out of the water and to say, you're safe to just stay here and ask questions and disagree and be uncomfortable and struggle with that as a believer and as a non-believer. Again, both sides, right?
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, good point.
Well, I think maybe what helps get there is really knowing the root of where faith comes from.
The root, did you say?
The root of where faith comes from, and that's a change in heart as well as a change in mind. So oftentimes when you're communicating with a scientist that's highly intellectual, oftentimes maybe even more intellectual on scientific theory than people within the body of Christ who were the Christian community, it's very easy to get defensive and backpedal. But if we can understand their paradigm as somebody that's intellectually sharp, but their heart has not been changed, that they can't get to that component of faith all the way. So we got to love them and trust that God, in His mercy, can get them there.
Good point.
And help you use the inerrant Word of God
Yeah.
to come alongside their science.
Yeah.
To hopefully get
Good point. Because they're a kind of they're very sensitive as well. Believe me, we all know it. And go ahead, Art, comment. But it's a very good point.
I love what you've said.
Yeah.
Rob's talked about Christians forming a circle. Well, scientists form a circle too. If you remember from what I was talking about in my opening, in my opinion, faith is what's good at relationships. That's not a realm of science. So guess who I think has to break those circles?
That's right. Thanks. Robert, did you?
I forgot what I was going to say.
Rob. Rob.
Oh, Neil Cole. Go ahead, Neil. I'm sorry.
This is a subject I've been studying for about 15 or 20 years. I'm a physicist. And I want to pick up on Gerald Schroeder that you referred to. He wrote another book called God According to God, which is an intriguing title in itself. But he came up with one thing which I think is foundational, and I'm going to pick up on that and expand it a little bit. He took the first verse of Genesis, which says, "In the beginning God created the heavens and earth." And he spent 20 years in Israel studying the Torah in the original language. And he says that is a bad translation of what the original language says. The word for beginning required a object, which the word beginning doesn't do. And he says what makes a lot more sense is to say, in the beginning, with wisdom, God created the heavens and the earth. The beginning gets there because in creation implies a beginning. But with wisdom, God created the heavens and earth. Now, there are two areas where science is on our side. We've got nothing to fear from science. I can tell you, you can look at that internal
video
cell and say, did all that happen naturally? And you say, no, it could not. But there are two areas where science is on our side and are no threat to us at all. As you said, the Big Bang is something they can't do anything about, but science absolutely confirms it. Without 98% of scientists agree on the Big Bang, and they have no scientific explanation of it. The thing that hasn't been mentioned here, but is absolutely critical, is the fine-tuning of the universe. What they have found about the properties of the universe are so fine-tuned. You may not be familiar with expressions of numbers, but there are 10 to the 80th power atoms in the universe. That's billions of galaxies and billions of stars and all of the atoms in there. The chance that fine-tuning took place by just happenstance is something like 10 to the 2000th power. They cannot deal with that, and they cannot dispute it. The second thing they can't deal with, and nobody, even Richard Dawkins says, we don't know how life began. Nobody does. And they don't, and they won't. So you've got two areas where scientists have got no explanation whatsoever, and I don't think they ever will, because it is too far beyond. They don't know how to create a DNA cell in the laboratory, much less get all of the chemicals together and have it shaking up in a bottle or lightning strike it. They're just not going to be doing it. What I have concluded here is that true science is absolutely no threat to faith. False science can be. What evolutionists claim for what evolution they say did cannot be backed by science. That is a presumption that there's a material answer to everything, and evolution is the only game in town. But the fossil record does not support what they say evolution did. So my final point is science is on our side. True science is on our side, and we have nothing to fear from it.
I appreciate your comments, except one where you said they can't do it. Well, it's not them. You know, we're one family of people. So we can't explain those things. But it's well said.
They I was referring to are those scientists who are coming against this and saying we've got the answers.
I'm afraid that the second you say anybody and refer to anyone else, you immediately create that circle that we were talking about that we need to break down.
We versus them.
We versus them. And so those that may hold an absolutist claim with no recognition of uncertainty are really the people that we find in ourselves a lot. And so when we recognize that, we're humbled by it, and we want to hear their thoughts. We want to hear the reasons why they hold on, even when there is actually uncertainty in their heart, like Josiah was saying. Yeah, so I would, maybe I'm agreeing with you, but in a very different way. Because the people I work with on a daily basis, they see truth in evolution, in biological evolution, as well as the geologic record. It makes sense to them, and they're working very, very hard to make sense to others. And so that means that they are taking away the jargon, and they're teaching it. And if you're ever interested in learning about it from people who are not trying to destroy your faith, there are people on the UT campus. Darwin Day has radically changed over the last 15 to 20 years. It is an open, educational environment that's not trying to step onto places where they don't have evidence for. And they can go into panels just like this where there's scientists, and you can ask them openly, what are the major questions that you still can't answer about this? What is propelling you forward to work day in and day out, giving a large portion of their lives? And they're going to tell you a lot about what they wonder, what's driving them. Yeah.
That's happened
There's a question back here, Moldy, if you don't mind. Thanks, Neil.
Well, it's
This will
going
be
back.
our last question,
Oh.
by the way.
Well, let me say hello to Catherine, who couldn't make it. That's my daughter, and I see we're
Oh.
taping this.
I thought, hi, Catherine.
I've heard a couple of you talk about the Big Bang Theory in reference to pointing to an intelligent creator. Is that correct? No. Okay,
No,
so you're shaking
no,
your head.
I was
Oh, yes.
guilty over here.
Could someone elaborate on what you mean by that?
On-
Yeah, I think you mentioned it too. I think I heard it from you.
You go first. Go ahead, Chris. It's the last question, so
Well, I
go
think,
ahead.
the history, there's a very interesting history behind that phrase Big Bang. And I think there are a few people here in the audience may know it, but it was actually, the way I understand it, the title was given to this theory by an atheist by the name of Fred Hoyle. Is that correct?
Hoyle.
So at the time, basically turn of the 20th century, you had the steady state model that the universe was eternal. So if you've got an eternal universe, you really don't need a creator. Now, Einstein and relativity kind of flipped the script. Now, so we've got this plasticity, this moldable, bendable universe.
A lot of jargon going on there, Chris.
Well, I guess let me cut to the chase. When I was 8 years old, reading Scientific American and read about Big Bang, I thought to myself, wow, if God spoke the universe into existence, it probably was a Big Bang. Mm-hmm. Now, Big Bang as a model itself really couches under it all the amazing things that would have to happen to give you an organized universe. It couches, you've got to have all this energy. You've got to have a space-time bubble that originates. You've got to have, the energy has to be emitted into it, and simple atoms come out first, and then stars have to form, and galaxies have to form, and it is just replete with miracle after miracle after miracle after miracle to get what we have today, a universe that we believe has 400 billion galaxies. And we really don't know that we've seen it all. That's how much we think it is. So I think, the Big Bang itself created an apparatus through which to ask all these important origin questions that were kind of discounted, in the 19th century as unnecessary because you had a static eternal universe. Does that answer your question? Or?
Yeah, and let me take a crack at it as well, if I may. In the beginning, to me, the Big Bang is saying, yes, we, the scientific community, not me, physicists, astrophysicists, are conceding that there was a beginning. There was a point before time that there was a beginning. And all of this that started as so dense, like the size of a pen tip, became all of this. And it came out of nothing. We have no idea. Again, I keep using that term in time, the beginning, but what's behind that curtain? We cannot, to my knowledge, create something out of nothing. Defies the laws of physics that we know today. Something supernatural had to be in place. And I've talked to some physicists about this thing, Big Bang, and someday somebody may say, yeah, we've proven that the wave theory is the answer. And anyway, the point is that's my grounding that I use personally to say, yes, there's proof that there was a beginning and that this was a creation. Did you want to respond, Frank?
Hang on, Frank. He's coming with the mic. Thank you.
Qualitatively, you agree?
You made a great qualitative point, but I think another quantitative aspect of it is that there's energy and mass, and the mass has gravity. The balance between the energy and the mass had to be perfect. If it varied 1 in 10 to the 60th power, if it was too slow, then the universe would collapse and there wouldn't be time for that evolution that Mr. Will Hoyt said could be a miraculous way of looking at creation, and I agree with him. But if it was too fast, then you would not get stars. Without stars, you don't create the molecules of life. You don't have a place for planets to go around. So it had to be absolutely perfect, either too fast and no stars, or too slow and no universe. It collapses back.
Thanks for your help, Frank. in any way kind of answer what you were asking?
Robert has one more comment on that.
Allie, I just wanted to, I guess, throw my hat in the ring on this. I see it more like, imagine the scientist is like a hound dog that's sniffing the trail of evidence. They've sniffed it all the way and they hit a wall. There's something that happened. And beyond that is the supernatural, because it is not yet natural. We don't have a way to test it yet. God is a legitimate explanation for that, but it's not testable yet. And science relies on that test. So I think we see it, we all explain the same things, but we're all seeing it in different ways. So.
No, and that's the dead end you were talking about. That,
Kind of,
you know,
yeah.
you can't test it. It's not observable, testable, or verifiable in our world. Suzanne, if I may just say one other last thing.
Just one.
Okay, just one. Okay. The underlying theme of this discussion tonight, we didn't answer these. The underlying theme is that we should be gentle, outreaching, and loving to others. Break this circle and reach out there. Hold fast to our essential beliefs, to our faith, and ask others to give us input in other areas. And you said it very well, Robert, several times tonight about in a loving way. And we don't know, right, Art, where science is going to be taking us in the future, but we welcome it, basically. But thanks, Suzanne.
Thank you all. Can we show some appreciation for them? Yeah. Great job. Appreciate you guys. Thank you so much. We have the reference list. You guys see this up here. It's what's printed also on your sheets. Please take that and explore. We also have the resources in the back. Doug, you can be our Vanna. Thank you. And Frank had provided several things for you all to take with you if you would like to. Here's what we would like to ask you to do. If you pick up something off the table, take it, enjoy it, pass it around, bring it back next Pub Talks, and let's just continue the passing. All right, we'll put one set in our library up at church on the second floor, and feel free to check that out at any time. But let's keep the information rolling here. We'll probably just continue to have a table in the back each Pub Talk so that can happen. Come in, put it there. You don't need to check in with anybody. The last thing, feel free to stay in chats. This is just warming up, and I hate it that we have to cut it off, but we have children in the nursery and some workers who need to go home. So we would like to invite you, please stay, enjoy yourself, get into some good discussion, enjoy the mystery of God and the unknown of a lot of what we're saying. I would just like to say thank you for coming. Thank you for being in this with us. And we appreciate you. Have a good, safe night when you end up leaving here. There's storms coming. Thanks.